Welcome to Command and Control, a podcast series about military command and the control measures used to orchestrate combat engagements and wars. In this episode, we're talking artificial intelligence in C2 systems with Henrik Sommer. The show is sponsored by Systematic.
At Systematic, we make the coordination of fires simple by unifying your operational and fires missions plans into one C4 ISR management platform. The Sitaware fire support module increases your responsiveness by reducing the time between target identification and fire's response, while ensuring full collaboration between all elements involved in the operation.
There continues to be considerable hype about how AI will change warfare. Many people say it already has. Military chiefs talk about AI more than they talk about ammunition, and in a way that seems to indicate their belief that AI can be sprinkled on anything and make it better, like some kind of pixie dust. There are certainly ways and areas that AI is bringing about a huge change in society, some parts of medical research, and certainly in astrophysics, for example. But there is a new discussion that's been mainstreamed, the downsides of AI. Research has shown the tendency for AI to hallucinate, that is to lie and give false answers, and that doesn't seem to go away. We've started to see operational decisions in policing guided by AI intelligence that is simply made up, with disastrous consequences. And we're also being warned that by sowing AI in middle management, the use of agents, it might mean that we have no future managers coming through a system who have the requisite experience of running businesses or dealing with customers or employees. So what does all this mean for military command and control? A couple of years ago, I spoke to Henrik Sommer from Systematic about artificial intelligence. I'm not sure how dated that conversation would be now. After all, my life hasn't changed that much by the arrival of AI, less some helpful recommendations in my reading list to be sure, but neither have the majority of combat operations I've seen and experienced over the last wee while changed or transformed. Yet there is something in the Ukrainian Delta system, for example, that has harnessed parts of AI's utility and made it more effective. Given that Systematic have recently launched their own AI tool called Wingman, I thought I'd ask Henrik back on the show to tell us about what he thinks AI is going to bring us and how soon. Just to refresh your memories, Henrik served for 40 years in the Danish military with operational tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo and NATO. He commanded at pretty much every level up to and including Brigadier General. His focus today at Systematic is on making a difference to people in uniform for operational gain, not simply to look good, and that aligns with what Systematic tend to deliver. C2 systems that work, are shaped by combat and warfare, and add value rather than just consuming time or making the creation of PowerPoint briefs much easier. Henrik, listen, welcome back to the show. I guess we should start with a pretty basic question for me, at least, to get us all on the same page. I guess it's really how fast is AI developing? There's lots of hype about it out there. There's lots of experts talking about it, but how fast is it really going?
Well, thank you very much, Peter. I'm delighted to have this conversation with you. And a lot of things have happened since we talked together 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, we talked about AI. Today, we do AI because we do have already AI in our products because it's mandatory to have AI. It solves a lot of tasks. And we'll come back to that because there are both some benefits, but there are also some risks that you need to identify and be aware of. And then AI is constantly developing. The latest development is Agentic AI. And we'll come back to that too. And what impact will that have on operations? So AI in our products today is, you could say, it's not an officer or an NCO who takes decision, but it automates and helps a lot of the tasks that you do in an operational staff today. And in an operational staff, you have a lot of processes, and you still have it. And how can you make these processes work quicker? So if you look at the individual officer today, often it's about, do I know something about what's happening at this moment? Where can I find that kind of information? Without AI, it will take you a lot of time to find the information you're looking for, not even doing analysis of the information. So I would say you can save 60, 70% of the time it took you before you got AI to find the data you are looking for to do your analysis. But one thing, before we actually start talking about AI, we have to talk about data. Because if you don't have the right data you can trust, you don't have to talk about AI. Because if you have, let's say, false information, inadequate data, wrong data, the AI will not be able to identify that this is fake information. Often when we talk with military from different nations, they ask, how can AI help us identify false data, misinformation? And that is actually really a problem. But one way to get around it is in NATO, when you talk about information, you have credibility and reliability assessment. And for example, if you have a sensor, let's say you have a radar, all that data coming from that radar, you will probably categorize as very credible, very reliable. And therefore, when you start utilizing or finding your data, you can say, I only want to have credibility, reliability on 5.5, which is the highest level. That's the NATO standard. But maybe it could also be interesting to see what does the data that is reliable 1.1 tells me. And again, can I trust my data is really important. And when you look at the civilian society, all the data you get from civilian society, not talking about social media, your public records, etc., is structured data. And most of the data coming from the military world is unstructured. So you need to make your data structured before you actually can start applying AI. But you can use AI to take your unstructured military data and make it structured data. An example, you have a UAV flying, it records videos, you know the location of where this video is being taken, you know the time, but what's on the video? And there you need to use, for example, content-based image detection to identify, for example, I got 10 hours of video. I want to know, is there a tank or tracked vehicle on these 10 hours of video? And that's the first thing you do. And then it identifies, yeah, you got 40 seconds where there's tracked vehicles and tanks. And then that is automatically being processed in our system. So when all that video images are being uploaded, it will be processed and thereby going from unstructured data to structured data. So later on, when you want to assess in that area what had happened the last 24 hours of military activity, then it will find these video clips where you have tanks and tracked vehicles. But you couldn't find it unless you have the structured data. So that's why data is really important, and this credibility, reliability. And then when you start applying AI, for example, a large language model, a chat algorithm, then you must also learn how to prompt with that or talk to that AI, that algorithm. So you said you will only have credibility, reliability 5.5. Tell me what's happened within the last 24 hours within that area. Then you can start trusting it. But again, can you really trust it until you have tried it many, many times? And that's why experimentation is hugely important. So coming back to the military staff work, yes, AI, you need it in a modern staff, but you need to identify what kind of task do I need to have AI automating me to solve, and thereby get some output that can be decision support. And in the end, the decision make are really important, because if you depend on AI that constantly gives you the wrong information, you will really make huge or mistakes at scale. So again, I think you still need both processes, but you can automate that. We can talk about that in Agentic AI. But you also need to have staff training. You need to have staff personnel and organization that is adapted to AI support in the military staff.
There's a huge amount to unpack there, Henrik, and we're going to come back to lots of those points in there. I just want to go back to that question of how fast it's moving, because the problem you outlined there very clearly, the transition from unstructured to structured data, for example, is that a problem that AI is going to solve at some stage in the short term? Are we going to see a methodology coming up whereby we don't have to worry about going through and classifying data, that AI will somehow come up with a tool that is able to go and do it, like it can order trainers or make trainers from a factory in China, ordered from the UK, and turn them around and get it shipped here without any human input whatsoever? Is there the speed, the energy behind AI in this area that it will change the way we can think about data?
Yes, the AI algorithms we have today, they can solve that unstructured to structured data problem. They will probably make some minor mistakes, but they will make less mistakes than if you have a human being doing the job. If you were to look through 10,000 images and identify a tiny spot, which is a tank, I think the AI will recognize that tank more often than you would be able to do. Still, if there's a tank, is that a decoy tank? Can you identify it on the image that it's not a real tank, but it's an inflatable tank, for example? So again, it's not 100% foolproof, and you just need to accept that. You'll never get 100% solutions, but you will get a better and faster output with AI than the human being. And by the way, in the military staff, we probably need to reduce the number of people in these tactical staffs because they are a huge target. And the fewer people, the smaller the target is. But again, yes, what we build into our products and the workflow we have in Sitaware Insight, which is our data platform and analysis tool, all the data that is being uploaded will automatically be processed to make that unstructured data into structured data. And then we can start analyzing the structured data. So yes, it's already there.
So if we're moving this fast, and in 2 years since I last spoke to you, I mean, there have been leaps and bounds. I've got young people in my household who have genuine relationships with their AI agent in their phone, closer relationship they got with some of their friends. I find it stunning. But how much is that problem for you in building C2 systems? I mean, if AI is moving this fast, can you keep up? Do you have to be selective? How do you address these problems of the speed of AI development?
Yes, because we have to. So the AI models we're using, they are not hard-coded into our core products. You can say they are attached. We have a switch. You can toggle on, toggle off these new algorithms. We see within certain areas, there's a new algorithm covering the same kind of capabilities every few months. So we are using a mix of commercial available algorithms and even freeware algorithms, because, there's a guy sitting in a garage and he's actually developing something revolutionary that replaces all the other algorithms within that area. So we test it and says, is that better? Yes or no? One of the caveats with new algorithms coming out all the time, some of the algorithms need training. And if you replace an existing algorithm you have spent a lot of resources training with a new algorithm, you have to retrain it. So there's something you need to consider when he says, I need to have the latest development in all my algorithms. But what about the training costs? Some algorithms, you don't need to train it. They are, let's say, trained by themselves. They recognize in an image, they can recognize vector patterns, for example, and says, okay, something is moving here. With other, for example, object detection need to be trained. And even your chat GPTs need to be trained. I read somewhere ChatGPT, they spent $280 million training the ChatGPT. Replacing an algorithm with another may not be an easy decision, because if you have to spend 3 months training a new algorithm, you may not have time to do it. So you have to say it's okay with the second best.
So we're going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but I want to pursue this. It strikes me that who is training that algorithm is pretty important. In a headquarters I used to operate in, if you have a problem, if you chuck an intelligence guy at it, he would come at it from one direction. You chuck a logistics guy at the problem, he'd come at it in a different way. You chuck a medic at it and they come at it in a different way. A submariner comes at it a different way, from an infantryman to a tanker to an artilleryman to an aviator. Everyone comes at every problem in very different ways. Is that the same for AI? Does it matter how you train the algorithm, because that affects what comes out of it the other end?
Some of the algorithms does, particularly that recognize images, recognize objects in an image, that needs to be trained. And you have to identify what is the training material. We have a training functionality where it says, this is good data. I'll put that into that folder. And when I retrain my AI, I'll use everything I put into that folder where I do have some trustworthy data. Some of the others, they are trained when you're using it. So when you says, well, you actually answered me wrong, then somehow it will remember that, okay, the first answer I gave was not the right one. So next time it will give you a better answer when you ask the same questions. So again, training is really a huge area where we could discuss for hours, but you need to identify, first of all, what do you want to achieve with this AI? And then identify the data and what kind of training do I need for the algorithms which will help me solve the problem I have identified. Because I sometimes here's my world, I have a lot of problems. How can AI solve it? So identifying what kind of core problems do I need to have solved by AI, the military needs to identify that. And then we can help them saying, this is the AI models that can help you solve that problem.
It always strikes me as interesting that you still end up with this sort of delineation of agents that do different things, right? Algorithms that do different pieces of the puzzle. And so, for example, you would never use an intelligence tool, for example, to be the same one that runs decision support for commanders in course of action. And yet some companies do that, right? So the Maven system is a intelligence system that is being broadened out to do everything for everyone. And it strikes me that you managed to delineate these processes so that you retain these trusts rather than just making it a broad wallpaper that covers everything with one agent that is not designed to do all those things.
Yes, I've heard of Maven. I haven't tested it, so I can't say what they're doing. But what we realized that in the past, when you had a problem and you didn't have AI, you had some kind of, let's say, rule-based manual, for example, weather impact on operations. It was 300 pages saying when it's raining, you can't do fast jet close air support. You can still use artillery and things like that. In the past, we would have hard-coded that into software. Today, you use an AI, and that AI, whether it's weather, it's something, here's some rules, learn them. Here's a specific situation, and then you ask, what will that specific situation impact my operations based on all these rules you have learned, the AI? And then it comes up with a recommendation. For example, you can do a fast jet for the first 4 hours of the operation, then it gets cloudy. And normally it takes a lot of time for 4 or 5 staff officers to analyze that. That will be done in 30 seconds. And the same algorithm can be used in other places where you have same kind of, let's say, challenges. You have manuals with thousands of pages telling you this is some kind of rule-based. If you have that information, you must do that. Today, you can use that algorithm. So some of the algorithms may be very, let's say, specific on image analysis, but others may be a general AI that can be applied across the whole staff. When you have some data, you have a specific situation, and what should I be doing? So I think that has been the development within the last couple of years when AI is really being developed, that you in the past have specific AI models. You still have them. For example, translation, OCR scanning, when you have an image and there's a number on that tank turret, it can read the number on the tank turret. But again, if you want, for example, to make an intelligence summary, and you have let's say, an Indian battalion with you, and you want to translate it into Hindu, then you have different agents that actually, first of all, one that goes through your journal for the last 24 hours, what enemy reports have been sent to us. And then you have a manual saying, how should an intelligence summary look like? What kind of headlines should be there? And then it says, you tell the AI only want to have 1.5 page, and it has to be translated into Hindu. And then it addresses different specific agents and come up with a final result. So I think that has been the development. You still need some very specific AIs. I mentioned some we developed by ourselves, for example, anomaly detection of shipping. The Danish Navy is using that anomaly detection to identify which ships do normal behaviors. You probably read in the news the last couple of years, some of these ships drops an anchor. It reduces speeds, turn a bit to the side where you drop the anchor. But when you have 3,000 tracks on your screen, do you notice that within 300 yards, a ship suddenly reduces speeds and turn a bit to the left? It will tear a cable on the seabed and then will speed up and continue. Will you notice that? Probably not. So again, that is a specific AI we develop, and we train it on the data on shipping for 1 year. Again, here's the training. Some of the training information you have from real-time sensors, and you need to restore that kind of data so you can use it for training purposes.
Okay, let's drag ourselves back up and just a little bit on word usage. I've talked about agents because I think that I know what they are. You've talked about Agentic AI. Could you just explain all of this a little bit more from the audience, just so that they don't go into some of these conversations with the wrong mindset or the wrong baseline understanding?
Yes, certainly. 6 months ago, I never heard about the term Agentic AI, but realized that what we have been doing was creating agents. And you can somehow say an agent is a staff personnel who has been specialized in, for example, do terrain analysis. And then you have different agents. You have different staff members who are very well trained within specific areas. And then when you talk about agentic AI, instead of you have a branch chief or a chief of staff saying, I need to speak with these 4 people and receive their input, their assessment of the situation. The agentic AI gets a task, and then it identifies which other agents do I need to ask a question and get data back from. So we do have very specific processes in a staff. You have your standing operating procedure, standing operating instructions saying when you do operational planning, you have 7 steps. There is a NATO STANAG APP 28 saying land tactical planning procedures. But the agents, the agentic agents, they may follow these processes. And I think in the beginning, it will be useful they follow these processes because then you understand what's going on. But eventually, these agentic AIs, they will identify which information do I need to solve these problems and where can I find it? And there's no human who is telling the AI that. I think that's the simple question or answer for that one.
I was just thinking about that in the context of hunting Russian submarines back in the day in the North Atlantic. That, I had a couple of brilliant meteorologists with me who would talk about the weather. I had a hydrographer with me who was just incredible at thinking about the column of water space and all the bathymetry that came with it. And those might be agents in themselves. And effectively, the agentic AI is the person who would almost sit in the command brief, pull all those things together and come up with and therefore here is your optimal search area. Understanding water space management looks like this, bathymetry looks like this, weather fronts look like this, the way Russians operate is like this, the previous track data. And you sort of get that idea of it. It's a pooling of different sets of knowledge into one area and then displaying it. Within that, have you seen, and I'm genuinely interested because I read a lot about AI hallucinations, have you seen hallucinations within the systematic systems that you've had to train out? Have you had no report to them? Do you have safeguards? How does that work for you?
You're right. Hallucination is something that happens. And often an AI, if it doesn't know what the answer is, it doesn't say, I don't know. It normally gives you an answer which is probably completely wrong. One of the things that we have experimented with is if I ask a question and the answer is then being asked again and again and again, do you get the same answer? When I ask you a question and you give me an answer, if you reply with the same answer 5 times, then I probably believe you. But if you give me 5 different answers on the same question, then I says something is fishy here. I don't think that's the real truth. So that is one of the way that you can get around it. You build in a system that it gives the same questions several times, and then it starts comparing the answers. Are they consistent or are they different with major differences every time? So that's one of the ways you can solve that hallucination challenge, because if you don't address it, you may make mistakes at scale. And that's not workable in the military, to be honest. Then I think the chief of staff's, no, shut off that AI, we'll go back to the manual work. So again, we are trying to technically minimize that problem. But again, we'll probably come back to what kind of training is needed to use AI, because we still need the extremely clever, well-trained staff personnel that has that, let's say, doubt all the time. What I see and what I assess, is that really what is happening? Is that the ground truth? So again, AI will not solve that problem because it will never give 100% correct answers. But again, you need to have the human in that loop, and you have to have the human in a loop across all levels too.
And the human, you said it, has got to be able to talk to the AI in a way that provides prompts that allow it to respond. I'm fascinated by the idea that AI will never say, I don't know. I don't know what stops it doing that. When I was in headquarters, I always had more faith in people who said, I don't know, but I'll go and find out, than I did in someone who sort of bullshitted their way through it and came up with any response in order just to satisfy my curiosity. I don't know what it is that stops AI from saying, I don't know, but I think that would be a massive move forward. Listen, Henrik, the one thing we've not talked about yet is your new product, Wingman, which in many ways pulls together all these things that we've been talking about. Tell me a little about Wingman. What's it designed to do?
Yeah, initially we designed it as a really, really advanced search engine. So you could talk to your data instead of like you do it in the past on Google. When you ask for something, you got a lot of files. You can click on links and read more. You could ask it to translate text. You could ask it for search for images, search in reports and things like that. But we have developed that further. So now you can ask it to make an intelligence summary. And we also build in that it should put in, if it gives a reply, where does that reply come from? For example, if you ask it to make an assessment in an area, it comes up with, let's say, 10 paragraphs of what's going on. And then in each of these paragraphs, there's a small footnote you can click on. And then it tells you, where did I get that information from? Because that was part of, let's say, the explainable AI. Can I trust it? Then we are improving it to go in the agentic agent way. So you actually start asking it for more complex questions, and the output you get is also more complex because it takes into account a lot of other things. One thing is important also that we have put into Wingman is, if you just ask a question about an area, you will probably get some slightly wrong answers because you don't know what kind of data the AI is looking at. In Wingman, you can say, I have these 20 reports. Give me a summary of these reports or an assessment based on what's in these reports. only these 20 reports, not the 1 billion data sets you have, because there's a lot of misinformation. So you can actually control what kind of data is the AI looking at, so you get a more reliable and trustworthy output. And then we have this more complex way of, for example, it can read layers in Sitaware. If you want to ask for a course of action, let's take an operational planning process. Your brigade is being tasked to make an attack, an assault on an objective. Your brigade is in an assembly area. You get your division order with line of departure, objectives, and things like that. And you don't have to do more than just make a layer where you have your own organization with your units, your name units in that assembly area. You tell them this is the task, and then it will give you a course of action description. Again, you must have a manual saying how do you develop a course of action on brigade, division, and corps level. I know United States, they have a manual 600 pages describing that. Again, in order to understand how this AI should work, it needs to learn. We said, okay, look at that manual, that's the baseline. You put in your terrain analysis, and then you ask for example, there's enemy trenches, so we need to make a breach operation. So I ask it to make a breach operation in the first phase, and it comes up with a course of action. And to be honest, that takes 40 seconds, and then it has it. We can also ask it to make a layer, an operational layer, where you have the units where they are going to maneuver based on that course of action. And then you can start saying, okay, now I've got 3 course of actions. Please compare these course of actions in relation to the commander's planning criteria. And then within 10 seconds, you have risks, you have speed, which of these 3 courses are the best one. And then you can start comparing it with the enemy course of actions. And this is what we're building into the Wingman, because it will be a help to you. It will reduce time, but still, it cannot deliver surprise. So you still need to have that, because military operation is not mathematics, part mathematics, but it's also art. And I know that a lot of algorithms can make a painting, but again, here we're talking about military operation and not something for fun. So we need to be able to rely on it. But you will save a lot of time, and this time you can spend on using your brain power to really make some good course of actions and present it to the commander. And by the way, presenting is actually a vital part of your staff work. So we're also experimenting with, now you have a course of action, please make it a presentation that you can present to the chief of staff, your branch chief, or the commander. Again, reducing the manual work. It's basically all about automation and different levels of automation.
And how has Wingman gone down with your clients? I mean, are we past beta phase testing? Where are we with it? What's the feedback? I know you have this great thing where you provide these updates like every 6 months. It's like Apple update. They come to you, you don't pay for them, they just update, they provide you with more functionality. How's it going down with clients, and where are the upgrades going at the moment? What's the direction?
The military, of course, when they're looking at it, they want to have this all singing, all dancing system. The big red button, I just press it and all my problems have gone. But if you look at the military, what they're doing, just having a wingman that can search your data, that can process your data into structured data, that can help you translate, make simple reports, I think that will be a huge help. One of the challenges is also the hardware, because when you start talking about AI, you need to have some pretty powerful servers or laptops. And you have to take that into consideration too. So you won't have huge algorithms with terabytes, big data at a platoon level. That will never work. It's not doable. So the automation, the simple automation, I think when we went from writing reports and telefax and things like that, then we had word processing and chat instead of voice. It was a huge step forward. The next step is just start to automate your processes. And then we can expand with these more advanced AI algorithms. Or better, start experimenting, because then you can make probably a big leap forward, because then you understand what is the system capable of doing, what are the hardware requirements. So I would recommend start experimenting immediately in a closed environment, so you can start learning, because you need to learn how AI works in order to set the right requirements. Again, for example, training. I don't think a staff will be replaced by one big computer where you have AI in. You will still have people in there. And what about connectivity? If you don't have connectivity, you can only process the data you have, let's say in-house where you are. That is also okay, but you also need to be able to operate with less support. But of course, you want to be at a highest level where everything is functioning, and you should strive to work towards that all the time. But you must also be capable of, for a short period, go down to a less technical staff work, and then when it's up and running again, then you have all the advantages.
We're overrunning, but I think this conversation is so important. I want to keep going for a second. I've got two more big questions that I want to ask you. Last time we spoke, we talked about the key restrictions in AI C2 systems for the military, one being connectivity. We talked about that the last time. I don't think it's changed as much. The functionality redundancy that sits within the system as standalone, and then with occasional connectivity to update it. The second one is the power requirements. Everyone talks about the amazing amount of power that AI uses. Is that still the case, or is it the case only in development? So when you're actually using it, when you've got the agentic AI, you start posing these questions. Is it a massive power draw? I don't know what to compare it to, but there have always been these discussions about the amount of processing power that AI requires. Is that only in development, or is it during use? So in your air headquarters, you're posing these questions to agentic AI, you're working with it, trusting it to develop courses of action. Is that sucking up huge amounts of power?
It does. It does. And therefore, you need to draw an architecture of where do I need to have these big servers. And in our product suite, where we have smartphone or tablets, there you can actually prompt a question. And that questions go through the communication lines that is built into Sitaware, maybe up to divisional level where you have these huge servers. You also have the huge amount of data. And then it processes that prompt or question. And then the answer is being sent back. That may be an overlay or a short text. So you don't have to have that huge equipment power at the edge. And therefore, I think we already talked about reach back capability for the last 30, 40 years. And I think that will be more important. One of the challenges is classification, and what kind of platforms, what kind of classification level are allowed to communicate with each other. So cross-domain solution is also something that you need to take into account. But again, there are solutions, and it will probably be that you have your data and your processes in the rear area, because if you hit a huge server, a huge data repository, all that is gone. So you need to have a cloud structure too. So if one of your nodes is being hit by enemy fire and destroyed, then there must be a backup solution. But in order to have that backup solution, all these huge data repositories have to synchronize all the time, and that takes a lot of bandwidth. So I would recommend make an architecture of where you want to have your data, where do you want to have your big servers, where do we have the demand for information, not necessarily the data that will solve or deliver the answer. I think that's getting more and more important to realize. But also what we see is the AI can run on smaller and smaller computers. You have smaller algorithms. But again, the development always demands more and more. The hardware is getting better, but demand signal from the software is also increasing. So it somehow balances itself out. But there's no doubt that in the future, or even today, you can make an architecture where, for example, at a battalion command station, they can actually utilize all the information that is available at core level just by prompting.
And it feels like where you see this in use at the moment, whether it's Ukraine, where they do the reach back, really well, or in, for example, Israel, where the AI systems behind Iron Dome, Arrow 3, that allow the really successful takedowns of drones and missiles coming into Israel, that's fine, where you have a fixed infrastructure that's protected. But as you say, if you're in a maneuver war and you're deploying and you're moving in an EM contested environment, this power, this provision of power, the provision of reach track, the connectivity is really fundamental. Does it feel likely that technology is going to come to a way where it's able to do this more efficiently without power? Or is that just a function of one of the laws of physics surrounding AI development, that power is going to be the driving requirement behind the systems?
Well, you have different levels of power you require. And therefore, in an environment where you often get disconnected because of electronic warfare in a degraded environment, as long as you have, let's say, your data on your computer and you can have, let's say, a limited AI, it will still give you some output. It may not give a huge output like if you have the big servers, but still what you got on your computer, which is not dependent on connectivity, you can still utilize it. And that's one of the things that the military need to assess too. What kind of data does, for example, a battalion need if they are preparing for delaying actions? So instead of not sending any data to them, they send a data package that they expect this will fulfill the requirements that the battalion commander has when he's doing that planning. So he can be disconnected when he has received that data package and actually benefit from a lot of the support from AI. However, if there is some questions that they didn't anticipate he would be asking, then he's dependent on that connectivity. But again, you still need to plan because you're not disconnected all the time. You will have connectivity, and in that time, you must, let's say, front load the data that is needed at lower echelons. And I also think that you need to, at higher levels, take into account that you will be degraded if there is an attack. I saw the Americans saying the first two commands that was employed in that operations was Space Command and Cyber Command. And that indicates that they were targeting the connectivity, they were targeting the situational awareness of the Iranian Defense Forces. But again, if you have your data locally, it doesn't matter if you lose connectivity.
Henrik, one final question I want to ask you. I mean, we've talked a lot about AI. There's a huge amount of people that are very excited about it. And there's another party that is increasingly worried about facets or elements of AI, whether it's the threat to humanity, the existential crisis it faces. Are there things about AI that worry you? I mean, you're deeply involved in this. You see a lot more, but you retain the sort of military outlook. Are there parts about AI that you worry about?
Yeah, I'm hesitating a bit because where will this development lead us? If I knew it, I would have a precise answer. Will we be able to have a Skynet that can disconnect all the people and destroy the world? I don't believe so, because in the end, if you turn off the power, nothing happens. That's, let's say, a simple one. If you have that big switch you can switch off if something's going on in a wrong direction. But what I do see is with Agentic AI that the AI is capable of doing some kind of assessment. It's not being told how to do it, but it identifies by itself what it should be doing. When we build our AI, it's mandatory. There needs to be a person in the loop, and you can discuss, can a human in the loop actually react at speed of lightning because it goes so fast? And I would say yes, because you need to have that assessment. Otherwise, if we talked about hallucination and suddenly you can make mistakes at scale if you don't have that human intervention. And maybe it's only 5-6 seconds that a human is looking at it and says, yes, go, or saying, no, I have a bad feeling here. and then you stop the process. So I think what we're doing is building in these stops, and currently we're looking at the current processes that are being executed in the military staff. Where do we need to have that human in the process, make an assessment, saying yes, no, or saying this is not good enough, or some of the processes, for example, if you're on a ship with self-defense, the connectivity between the radar, the fire control center, and the missile system, that must be automatically, because that's maybe 2 or 3 seconds you must make that decision. But if you are talking about moving or attacking with defense forces with 300,000 people or whatever, you do have the time to have people in the loop. So the only concern, I will not say it's a concern, it's just something you need to be aware of and discuss. And some of the algorithms, the publicly available algorithms, if you start talking about destroy or kill or whatever, it tells you I'm not allowed to give answers on that one. So there's some kind of ethical guardrails put into the publicly available AI. But of course, if you develop your own AI and you put it in an environment without connectivity, can you take away these ethical constraints that are built into the system? But again, I think there's a huge opportunity, and we just need to constantly be aware of how do we think the system should help us, on what conditions.
Henrik, it's not really a great note to end it on, but thanks for sharing your time and your views. And as always, your huge honesty. I keep being impressed by the aggressive pursuit of AI, but as performed by systematic and you, sort of the pragmatic military experience that sits behind it, that understands at the heart of this whole conversation, the number of times we've come back to or inferred this idea of trust between the human operator and the system. How do you build it? Where the limits lie? How does it grow and extend? How you tailor Wingman to selective evidence that you do trust, which enables you to have a higher trust, the trusted data sets, the idea that speed will come, but you need to understand the relationship with it. So much of this comes back to the trust element, and something that I know you and the company are going to be really keen on, just because of the amount of trust that your clients have in you and that military users have in the systems you provide. If listeners are interested to read more about AI and trust, there was a brilliant paper written a few years ago by Christina Bayliss and Paul O'Neill that came out from RUSI about trust in the military, specifically trust in AI and how it be used in future. I think it was 2021, 2022. I will dig out the link and stick it in the attachment to this episode because it's really important. But Henrik, thank you very much. The show is sponsored by Systematic.
Sitaware is trusted by more than 50 nations worldwide, including 18 NATO nations, and is the world leader in command and control software.
We hope you enjoyed the show. As well as telling your friends and colleagues about it, please do hit the like or subscribe buttons. This episode is produced by AureliusThinking.com as a show for the Waiver Room, the home of intellectual curiosity and challenging thinking for military professionals everywhere. Thanks for listening.